There we go. And I will start to share the slide deck. I just need to get that set up. Okay. Great, and we can see the screen. Is that correct?
It's loading again.
Yeah,
Great.
not quite.
There we go.
There
So
we
that
go.
should be on there. Great.
Thanks. Yep, got it.
No worries. Thank you. So I'll skip past these two slides, but we are so today's topic and is really about personal branding, and I've titled this session "Personal Branding the Authentic Way." The main thing I want to kind of really mention just at the very top end is this presentation is less about the practical side of the personal branding. So I'm not going to actually talk too much around how to use social media or when to use social media and that kind of thing. I do have some resources we can share that go into mainly LinkedIn in that regard. But this is actually going to be more about understanding what our personal brand is and kind of working through that, because realistically I find there's very little point to going through all of the hard work of actually setting up your LinkedIn, your Twitter, working through things like your resume and stuff like that to put all of that time and effort into making these things what in our view helpful if they don't actually match what our personal brand is or should be. So just to kind of go into this, kind of talk briefly around personal branding. So I've put in there that at the beginning here, let's say like personal branding isn't always easy. Sometimes it can be a bit of a beast, particularly when we look at things like again, social media is such a big portion of it, and understanding how those things kind of affect our personal brand, and also understanding things like how why employees or prospective employees look at our LinkedIn and those kind of things. But to kind of go through the point is I want us to look at the idea of basically making our personal brand authentic and unique to us. And to do that, we'll be looking at our personal brand as being our voice. And that's the acronym that I have gone with for this. I think that's actually quite a fitting way of understanding what our personal brand is. So to kind of go over what is personal branding, I'm pretty sure all of us on the call here will know what personal branding is as a general concept. But in a nutshell, it's a methodology that we use to promote ourselves. It's a blend of our expertise, experience, and personality. And just to put it very, very simply, it's how we put ourselves on display to the world around us, usually the working world, particularly. And so our personal brand brings everything about us together into a tangible and seamless experience of who we are, and what we've done, and what we stand for. So it kind of brings all of these things together, and basically tells people a bit about ourselves. It gives them like a bit of a nutshell. Think of it essentially like an extended version of an elevator pitch. It's like that kind of thing. Now, just in terms of how this will go, I'm going to go for each of the points. However, please feel free to either put questions in the chat, or what we'll probably do is we'll see maybe after each point, if there's no question in the chat, if there's any questions that people have or any thoughts that people want to chime in with, and we can do that. But to begin, to go to our acronym of voice, the first letter, of course, with that is V. And how I've put that down is for it to be our vision. And I don't want to get too much into that kind of like big, almost like business style jargon with this concept. But vision in my head, when I'm looking at it in terms of our personal brand, it relates to kind of like the goals that we have for it. So why do we want to put ourselves out there? Why do we want for people to potentially notice us, whether that's through networking, through social media, on our resumes? What is the goal of what we're doing with our personal brand? The goal could be as simple as I want to get a new job. The goal could be as simple as I want to start putting out more. I want people to grow my position within the Salesforce ecosystem, whether that's through the community involvement, whether that is through speaking at events, or whether that's through just again building a big enough network that if you're looking for a job, you can maybe tap on a few people's shoulders and go, "Hey, do you know of anything that's going?" So, with each one of these points, I think there's some questions that we can ask, and I've got some examples of this on each slide. But again, there's stuff that we can easily chat about. So for like our vision, again, we mentioned that being like kind of our goals. What do we want to achieve? So some questions I thought were good examples for this is around, what do I want people to know about me? What should people be aware of when it comes to myself, and how they kind of engage with me? For example, is it important for you to be seen as, like for example, like Kristen and a few others who we know from the course who went through like programs like Supermoms, for example. So how important to your personal brand, for example, is being a mother? How important to your personal brand is being a woman, being a person of color, that kind of thing? How important are those things? Also, what are your values? What drives you, essentially? So what do you want people to know about yourself? And then following on from that, like, how do I want people to feel when they engage with myself or the content? What do you want people's takeaways to be with that? So if you're, say for example, like I write a Salesforce blog, and for me, the goal for writing the blog is really very simple. I want people to read the blog, and for the content in there to be something that actually helps them along their career journey, whether that's through some of the content I do around like basic admin stuff. Like I did a post a few weeks ago, might be over a month ago now, which was just around some very quick and easy formulas that I use regularly. I got some feedback from that from another person who was really goes, "Oh, I haven't seen some of those formulas before. Those are really interesting. And they've started using them in their role." That's the kind of thing I want to see coming out from the content that I put out. See people actually finding the benefit in it, and maybe even implementing it into what they do. For that, like, what are my goals for now and in the future? So you might have goals that you're working towards. Might be potentially pursuing a certification, or you might be looking to move into a different role in a certain period of time. But what are the goals that you have for now and in the future? And with that, this is me coming from, again, probably sounds like a very admin kind of question, or even a business analyst question to ask in that regard. But it's like, if the goals I'm setting out are actually going to mean anything, how do I actually track my progress against them? How do I kind of monitor how I'm performing against those goals? And I put in the brackets here that maybe using Salesforce, whether that be probably through a dev org, that could be something quite helpful. I actually do that myself. I have a dev org where I have a custom object which is around my goals, and I have a custom object that links to that, which is around basically like contributions towards those goals. So I've got goals, milestones, and milestone contributions. 3 custom objects that talk to each other, where I can track my overall performance towards those goals and the steps involved in them, which is what I was classified as the milestones. So how can you track your progress against those goals is quite key with that. And then the last one, which is the question that, in full transparency, I absolutely hate when it comes to interviews, especially when you put on the spot. But it's a good one to try and think through at the same time, although it's something that I do self-admittedly have a bit of an aversion towards myself at times, and it's something I'm trying to get better at. But it's like, where do I want to be in X amount of years' time? So where do I want to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, whatever? So that's kind of really what I'm thinking in terms of vision, looking at the goals that we set ourselves, And that's kind of the starting point of creating our personal brand. It's like, what is the purpose of what I'm doing, and why do I want anybody to care, essentially. Before I move on to the next point, was there any questions, or has anybody got any thoughts that they want to chip in?
Not at this stage, Mark. I think I'm interested to see what comes next, and definitely in the discussion a bit later.
Cool.
I've got some questions about how you take that vision and then link that to your personal brand, and there's some stuff, but later.
I do have a thought that I'll share, Mark, which is what I love about this is that I think oftentimes, at least the way I think about personal branding is like with regard to positioning yourself as an expert in a certain subject, right? That when you put something out there, it has to do with like positioning yourself as like, I know this, and it's sort of, for me, that I have a real reluctance to put information out there and like have it set in stone almost. It's like, I know this for fact because, I'm the expert in this. But actually, what you're saying here is, how do you want people to engage with yourself, with the content, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be, that way. It could be more like the way that I would prefer people engage would be to ask questions, or to have more of an opportunity for a dialogue or like an exchange of ideas. And so I love this. And I think this could be really helpful for people like myself who are like so reluctant to put anything out there, lest it be like slapped down as like, no, you don't know anything about that,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, not to give like any spoilers away, but we do get into kind of like expertise and a little bit in this. But the thing that I think, which was really starting from what you were saying just there, Kristen, is for me, and it might just be my own personal stance, like I don't ever want to start with the position of I'm the expert here, because instantly what I suggest to me is if that's someone's starting point, is that they're putting themselves in the pride position. They're putting themselves above everybody else and going, hey, do you listen to me because I know what I'm talking about, and I probably know more about it than you do. That's the kind of impression I get with that. And that's not necessarily obviously true of every single person by any means. But when I think of people starting with the position of like, I'm the expert here, there's almost a level of perceived arrogance that comes with that, which I think can be very off-putting. So I have plenty of conversations, like people who know me, and we'll probably get into this a bit more on the when we get into the expertise side of the points. But like I make no bones about it. I absolutely love declarative process automation, particularly Flow. But even in conversations I have with people in the ecosystem on Flow, I don't start with that point. I'm not sitting there going like, no, I'm better than you with this. I'm like going, I will let them talk and have a discussion. And my approach is always try to be, okay, how can I help you with this? So in an element, there is a level of kind of expertise. So it goes like, I do know what I'm talking about with Flow, but I'm not here to lord that over you. I'm like, okay, how can I help you? How can I help you with Flow? Or how can I help better understand what your challenges are, what your views are, rather than going, hey, look, you take my way, because I'm not always right. And I think that's one of those points that comes with that. Okay, I think we'll move on. There's no other talking points on this particular one coming up. And the second one is about being openness. Now, in full transparency, I probably would have preferred to use the word genuineness here, because this is what really I'm referring to. However, thank you, thesaurus.com, for giving me a word that relates to genuineness that begins with the letter O to fit my acronym. But this is kind of what I'm talking about here. So it's like about being genuine, about being consistent with kind of like how we present ourselves. I put on there like being phony can be very off-putting, and I'm not saying that any people in the community are phony, but we do have to face the reality that some people will put out a completely different type of personality and a way of approaching things like that. Like we'll talk about this, there will be people out there who will put themselves out as being the expert and going, you should listen to me because I'm the expert here, which to me is quite off-putting personally. So I think openness and being genuine and being consistent is very important. So like the key question I begin here is like, for the first one, like, am I being a bit of a prat? Which is a bit of an interesting way to maybe put that. But it's like, if you're basically, if you are being a bit of a prat and like, you're not being like kind and considerate to others, and you're not really kind of listening to their views, people are just going to stop listening to you. I won't go into details, but there has been instances that I've seen recently on Twitter of people in the community who kind of putting out some stuff again around Flow, and then have had other people in the community basically like just slag them off in subsequent tweets and throw out very insulting comments to somebody because it doesn't fit how they would do things. That doesn't really help conversation, in my view. If you like, again, we're saying like everybody's different, everybody has different levels of skill, that kind of thing. So if you're somebody who's kind of is maybe a bit newer to something and goes, hey, look, this is something I've done, can I get your opinion on it? And someone turns around to you and goes, well, that's crap. That's not really a productive conversation. Likewise, if we do that same to the other person, like I won't go into details too much, but I remember having a chat recently with somebody. Again, this was to do with Flow. Somebody who I had done some work for showed the Flow that they built, and my initial reaction was to go, oh, I'm not too sure about that one. Like, it's not the best. But I just had to take a step back for a second and go, actually, if this was me 2 years ago, I probably would have done exactly the same thing that person had done. So while today I wouldn't do in that way, because I've learned a lot more about that in the last 2 years, there's that kind of understanding going, hey, you know what? For where their experience is with that particular tool, that's completely understandable. Absolutely fine. And what I did was I gave feedback, was, yes, actually you could tweak it a little bit and do it this way instead, and give a bit more context. And that's a little bit better of an approach, having that constructive feedback rather than just going, oh yeah, that's not great, or absolute rubbish, or slagging people off because they don't do things the way that you do. So that's a bit of a negative one to start off, but let's go into some ones that will hopefully be a bit more positive on this front, which is, do I present myself appropriately and consistently across all platforms? So again, this sort of feeds back into the prep bit, but we have to be realistic and stuff. And again, I said we weren't going to dive into the hows and the whats of things like social media, but we do have to be realistic here. If we are using our personal brand to look for potential opportunities, or we're dealing with recruiters and those kind of things, people do look at our profiles online. They look at our LinkedIn, look at our Twitter. There's been cases in the UK, for example, of people who have said something that they said like when they were 15, which was, realistically them just being a bit naive and a bit silly at that age, and it's cost them jobs later in life. And when you can say like, even though they might have changed from what they'd said, they've had that kind of knock-on effect because they've said something stupid. At the time they were 23, I think it was in this case, when they were looking for the job. So that was 8 years in between. And so it's like, we have to bear in mind that what we see online does potentially have a knock-on effect to our future prospects. So it's like, how do we conduct ourselves appropriately online, stuff like that. And you might have different takeaways and stuff like that. But like for me, I very rarely talk about stuff online that isn't Salesforce now, because all my personal views I tend to keep offline and in conversations to avoid that kind of thing. But So that's something that's worth considering. Like, how do you present yourself appropriately and consistently across all platforms? Likewise, how do you convey that sense of genuineness and openness across in your CV or your resume, depending on what term that you use? So again, this comes with the whole idea of potentially even going like, I'm not necessarily, I don't know everything, but I know enough about what I know to certainly do the job well, and have been able to kind of sell that to prospective people that we engage with, whether that's through networking, for looking for jobs. As well, with that, how do I present myself in a way that works with my personality traits? So, if you're someone who is a bit more introverted, which we'll get into that point, how do you present yourself in a way that doesn't make you look to be this overly outgoing person, for example? Or if you are an extroverted person, how do you present yourself in a way that doesn't basically minimize that? So those are kind of things to consider, like how do you present yourself in a way that reflects your personality traits, your interests, what the things that motivate you, and that kind of thing. And then the last bit was just to ask as a general question you can ask yourself is, are you an introvert, an extrovert, or are you somewhere really more in between? Now, truthfully, if you actually do any research on this introversion extroversion spectrum, most people actually fluctuate between the two. You very rarely find somebody who's only one or the other. And what you'll find is different situations will bring out the extroverted traits in that person's character, and certain situations will bring out the introverted traits. You very rarely, as I say, find somebody who's just an introvert or an extrovert. You'll have different situations, different groups of people that will lead them to being more extroverted or more introverted in between the two. So that's the openness point. And again, I thought before I move on to the next section, see if there's any questions or any talking points that anybody wants to raise. We'll move on.
Don't have anything in the chat, but if anyone would feel free to unmute and speak if anybody wants to.
I think one of the things that's quite interesting about being appropriate and consistent is one of the challenges I've had is I want to position myself as being very professional, and I want to position myself as being service orientated, but that's backfired on me in a couple of regards. One is positioning myself as being very service orientated has on occasion caused people to devalue my time and the work that I do, and just got annoyed at me because they think I should just drop everything to do whatever they want me to do. Yeah. And then positioning myself as being very professional has, when I brought on my new admin, I found it very difficult to have a connection with her. And it's not until I started being quite self-deprecating towards her that she's opened up more, and we've been able to work together better. But it does make me wonder how seriously then she takes me if I've been self-deprecating. So it's a real challenge to find the right level of what the brand is that you actually want to present.
Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think with that, one of the points I haven't really covered here, which I think is potentially quite important, which comes from what you were saying there, Katrina, is around setting personal boundaries as well. So, and that's part of that genuineness and consistency. So, like for example, if I had someone say messaging me and say like 11 o'clock, and I go, hey, can we meet to talk about Salesforce stuff? And I turn around and say yes to that, I would probably feel I'd have to do that all the time. But setting boundaries for yourself, it's completely fine to do that, because we need to from a very personal perspective, we need to look after ourselves as well. So like the reality is, if you're not in a good place mentally, physically, spiritually, overall, then that has a knock-on effect on everything that you do. that have a knock-on effect to how we approach things with our work, or have a knock-on effect to how we do things with our friends and our families. So basically, we need to look after ourselves, because when we look after ourselves, the things that we are involved in actually ends up being better overall for us and for those around us. So it's very important to set those personal boundaries, just to kind of make sure that people and ourselves are honoring of kind of where we stand on those particular things. So, like, if you're someone who turns around and goes, hey, you know what, every Wednesday night, for example, let's just say as a habit, every Wednesday night, that's time for me and my family. That's family time. Nobody interrupts me then, unless it's something really, really urgent. And those kind of things. And there's different ones you could do with that, whether it's one of the things you might see very often if you give time, like volunteers, is you'll find people will ask you for more. If you volunteer and stuff, you'll find people come to you and go, well, can you do a little bit more? Or can you do a little bit more? And eventually, practically, you just have to start being able to get to the point where you just say, I'm already doing enough. so I'm saying no to this. And that's a learning journey. Now, I'm still not all the way there yet. If I'm would be to be completely transparent about it, I probably still do a bit too much, but it's it's a learning journey in order to get those boundaries set. So I think with that, I'll move on to the next one, which was our letter I, and I do need to update that slide because I've realized I've got a 1 there, but I'll have a look at what else I can put on there. But this point here I'm referring to as intrigue, and this is about our interests and the things that we personally enjoy, our passions, our likes, our interests. Now, in the world of work, we have to be fully honest and go, not everything that we do is probably going to be stuff that we enjoy. However, if we would, in an ideal world, the majority of it would be stuff that we like and enjoy. Although we might not enjoy certain portions of it. So, for example, I find putting together like stuff for a data report really, really boring, to be honest. But as an admin, by trade, obviously now working in consultancy, but I was for 5 years an admin. That's stuff that we do all the time, very, very regularly. So while to me it's not something that really sparks my interests too much, it's stuff that I will still do because it's a part of the territory, essentially. But as mentioned before, like, I absolutely love process automation. So if I get into a project at work where I'm doing stuff around process automation, I can happily spend days upon days and hours upon hours doing stuff around the process automation. I even spent quite a bit of time earlier this year doing deep dives into Orchestrator, even though we don't actually aren't delivering any orchestration, doing any client work that actually needs orchestration at all. But I did that because I like Flow and I like to learn a bit more of that. So when it comes to kind of our interests and our passions, what you will often notice in practice is that you tend to do a better job overall with the things that you're interested in. And the reason for that is if you're interested in something sparks your curiosity or something you just enjoy doing, you as a general rule, you tend to put a bit more effort into it. And that's not to say that we don't put effort into things that aren't like that, absolutely not. But as a general, you do put more effort into the things that you like and that you enjoy. So how this fits within our personal branding is how you can actually talk about those points, because what allow you to happen is if you enjoy something and you talk about that, people can notice that, they can spot that, and you can build a reputation as being someone who knows quite a bit about that particular topic, even or they take stuff away from you. So one of the things I often see online from people, because I do keep a watch of this, as I often see people who will share their stories about how they're going with learning Flow. it's something I'm passionate. I really enjoy in the community. I'm actually could be doing some stuff. I'll be teaching floor to people going forward fairly soon, hopefully. But with that, I do keep an eye on social media and see how people get stories are coming along, and that kind of stuff really interests me. So what you can ask in terms of like the intrigue is like, what things do I find interesting? What's the things that interest me the most? And how do I make those things part of my personal brand? And oftentimes that'll end up being more around kind of like, we talk about the expertise bit, but that often be, hey, I really like this area of what I do with Salesforce. So I'm going to talk about a bit more and hopefully build a bit of a reputation going, hey, do you know what? I am fairly good with that. And people can put that in there as well. I've also put the point around how do I quote unquote sell those interests of mine to others to showcase their value. And that could be in terms of things, stuff like resumes and stuff like that in terms of our CV. So how can we put across our interests that we have within what we do? And I'm looking at this in terms of like, if we talk about from a Salesforce perspective, how do those things that I enjoy doing the most with Salesforce, how do they actually benefit the career path that I'm trying to build for myself? How can I put that forward in a way that actually makes me stand out a little bit? And then the last point I had on that was, like, do these interests of mine translate into skills? And if so, how do I evidence that? And we'll get into that side of things a little bit more when we get into the expertise side of things. But that's quite a good thing to ask in terms of, like, so all the things I'm interested in, does that translate into skills, and how do I evidence that? Do I need to have like a portfolio in some ways, or do I need to use like DevOps, or do I do content creation like blogs or YouTube and that kind of stuff? How do I actually evidence those things and put that into that? So that's kind of my thoughts on this particular point. So I'll ask, before we move on, to any questions or any talking points before we move on to the penultimate point?
Yeah, I've got one for you, Mark. So on intrigue around the different things that you like, topics or things or interests or areas, do you give as much consideration into the situations that you enjoy? So like, whether you like working alone, whether you like working in a team, whether you enjoy presenting in formal situations, whether you like discussion and collaboration and challenge, whether you like fast-paced, or does your intrigue spark outside, does broaden across topics as well as situations in which you can evidence those topics? Is that something you give consideration to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could do so. Like, and I think obviously that the answers to that question would fully depend on the individual. But like, if you look at a resume, one of the things that you often see people putting on is like good team worker. So if you're someone who actually does enjoy working with a team, that can translate well into a CV. So it really is, yeah. So that kind of stuff can go into that. So like for me personally, I'm far more used to working on my own, in full transparency, because I spent 5 years as a solo admin. So I'm far more used to working on my own from a practical level. However, one of the things I've done quite a bit since I moved into my current role at CG is actually spent one-on-one time with one of our other team members, and particularly done that around, again, that's been mainly around floor, but it has been over conversations that we've had on there. But that's been really, really good to hop onto that kind of one-to-one situation and basically help somebody else out in what they're doing. I quite enjoy that, and all of that kind of side of things can fit into your personal brand. So that's why like for me, like I do mentorship. I've got somebody who I've been mentoring for over a year now, which I did through the mentorship program that Salesforce run. But I also have a couple of other people that I sort of unofficially mentor, I guess you could say. So we'll check in every so often and catch up and chat through things. And then there's a somebody who I'm mentoring through the Super Mums program, where I'm helping out to mentor somebody on the admin course. These kind of things fit into that. So I really do like that personally. But for you, that might differ. You might be more someone who prefers working in a big team or a small team, or you might prefer working on your own. So it's a good way to think about how you can put that across in your personal brand.
It's tough, isn't it? It's a tough challenge to potentially articulate and then communicate it, because like you say, at work you might play a role, externally outside of work, like you say, there's different community groups, there's mentorship, there's might be, it's quite hard.
Absolutely, yeah. But ways you can evidence it is through, like, a good example of a way you can evidence. So let's just go to a very practical example here. Let's just say you are somebody who likes facilitating discussions around particular topics.
Yeah.
So a very easy way you could demonstrate that is by, and I don't want to necessarily go fully down the content creation route or like recommend everybody become content creators if that's something you want to do. But for that particular scenario I've mentioned, an easy way to demonstrate that would be to do something like set up a YouTube channel and start doing like a almost like a video podcast thing where you invite people on and you facilitate those discussions and you create videos around that. That's a very easy way to evidence that. And you can link that to, say, a portfolio. You can link that when you put on your resume. You can say, hey, look, you can say even maybe build a website that just hosts those videos and then have that on your resume. There's those kind of things. And potentially as well, depending on what kind of interest you have, there might even be other certifications you can go down and things like that, which can then be added to your CV, your resume, to bolster that up. But as you say, look, it can be quite challenging. But it is a pretty big, important point with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. So let's shift on to the second to last point, and we're almost done. And this one here is credibility. And with credibility, I'm not necessarily talking too much about our expertise, although credibility and expertise goes hand in hand with each other. What I'm referring to by credibility is how trustworthy we are with what we say. So, for example, if I say something on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or in conversation, can people trust what I say? So if I say I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, can the person on the other who I've said that to actually trust I'm going to do whatever that X, Y, and Z was that I had mentioned? And so this is quite a big, important point with that. And some of the questions we can ask ourselves around that is, well, first one I'll mention is, am I willing to admit when I don't know something? So, again, let's say within the world of Salesforce is changing so quickly all the time. And again, I mentioned I don't want to harp on all the time about flow bars. That's a particular interest area of mine. Something I can probably talk about a bit more. But that has changed so much in the last 18 months in comparison to what it was 18 months ago. And there's even more changes coming to that realm when we look at things like the workflows and process builder being gradually depreciated. There's so much changes coming, and it's very hard for everybody to know everything about everything in Salesforce. So are we able to admit that we don't know something? So an example for that recently was I was working on a issue with a list button. And those things I found it in there, which I had completely forgotten about because it's been years since I've used Classic. And I found those things in there I couldn't do using the list button because the list buttons run from Classic runtime. And those things I couldn't make work because it's not. I was trying to get it to work in Lightning. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I don't know that. So I'm going to change positions and do it as a different approach. But how this point I'm mentioning there, how that will work in a conversation. Say if someone might come to you and go, hey, do you what? Can I ask you a question about Marketing Cloud? And you might be in a position where you're someone who has never touched Marketing Cloud at all. How would you answer that question? if someone says to you, hey, look, I'm really stuck on a marketing cloud issue, can you help me? I'm like, I don't really do marketing cloud. I can't really give an answer. And that goes into my second point, which is, are we willing to put the work in to go and learn about what we need to in order to succeed? And with that how that ties into the first point was like, am I willing to admit when I don't know something? The old youth worker in me, I used to do youth work for quite a number of years, but the old youth worker in me always wanted to say as a point of habit, if someone came up to me and asked me a question and I didn't know the answer, was okay, I don't have an answer for you right now. Leave with me and I'll come back to you with an answer. And then actually go away, look into it and come back with an answer. And even if that answer takes you a bit longer than you think, it's good habit to go back to that person and go, hey, look, sorry, my slides have gone funny. There you go. To go back to that person and go, hey, look, I'm still working on that point. I haven't forgotten. I will get back to you on that. So that's quite an important bit. And when it comes to how, like, are we willing to put in the work to go and learn what we need to in order to succeed, that can actually have a particular place in our working career. So it's no saying I'm working in consultancy now. So there might come a point where I am assigned to a project where I don't really know that much about that particular piece of work. So I might have to do some time on Trailhead, or might have to look into a certification on a particular topic. Again, marketing cloud might be a good example for that. So if I get put onto, say, a marketing cloud project, I'm probably going to have to spend a lot more time learning about marketing cloud because I don't really use it. So that's more about the attitude and the mentality of going, am I willing to go away and do the work with that in order to learn it. Following for those 2 points, I've got a couple of points to wrap up this particular point on credibility, which is, can people trust what I say about given topic, subject, and or situation? So again, it's not necessarily that when I'm talking about that people can people trust what you say, it's not necessarily saying that you have to be given all the right answers. It's more about, if you say something on a particular topic, so, hey, this is my opinion, this is what I think about this, or to my understanding, this is how it should work. Can people trust that? And does that come with a good reputation? And likewise, that brings us to the final point for that, which is my name one that could be associated with integrity and trustworthiness? So essentially, this whole point around credibility is, can people trust what we say when we say it? And is there any, and if not, how do we go about making that work around that to actually be in a position where people can do that? So before we go on to my final point, do we have any questions or talking points on this particular subject?
Don't think so.
Cool. Sweet. Well, this gets on to the last point, and then we'll be kind of wrapping up sharing the screen for a little bit and open up for discussion on this topic, or if there's anything people want to discuss on something that's not entirely related to this topic, that's also fine as well. But this is the last point on this one, which is expertise. So we have to be completely transparent and say that our experience, our skill set, that does play a major part in our personal brand. And they said in this area of expertise, focus on the skills. So here, what we want to know is, do we know what on earth we're talking about? So an example of that could be, you've got someone who's really, really new to the ecosystem, and they start giving advice out the wazoo, and you see them coming up with points which is like, that's not correct. And I'm trying to think of a specific example I could give on that, but I'm actually struggling to think of a specific example of that. But it's, so again, you don't have to be an expert at everything, so we don't necessarily have to worry about that. but this point around expertise is do we have the skills that actually reflect what we are putting out with our personal brand? So again, if we're talking very much about, let's just say you're someone who speaks extensively around what it means to be a good admin. Well, one of the questions we would need to ask them is, okay, are you someone who was an admin? Or are you an admin? And if you are, were you a good admin as well? And that's completely okay to ask in that regard. But it's like, does your skills and your expertise match what you put into your personal brand? So key questions we're going to ask ourselves here when we look at our point around expertise is, what areas of expertise can I leverage when building my personal brand? So for me personally, when you look at a lot of the content I put out in terms of my blog specifically, the vast majority of what I put out will be something related to admin, being a Salesforce admin, being involved in the community, or probably around Flow. It'll be, generally speaking, one of those kind of things. Or I might put stuff out there around like app builder, because I spend a lot of time doing work with app builder, things like dynamic forms and that kind of stuff. But it's like, how can you leverage that to build your personal brand? And I think for me, I can see good examples of that because I've started in the last year talking a bit more about Flow. And over the course of this year, I have been approached to deliver sessions on Flow, as was last year. And I've been able to speak at conferences, I spoke at Cactus Force in January, for example, on Orchestrator. So I've been able to leverage those skills that I have got and add them into kind of my personal brand. So I do spend a bit of time talking about Flow because it's something that I enjoy, it's an interest, and it's something I would like to think I'm pretty good at. And then follow on for, like, do those skills match up with what I convey on my resume or online? So if you've got a skill in something that is relevant, that you think is relevant to like a job that you might be going for, put that down on a CV. If you were to look at my current CV, for example, I do mention my skills around app builder, dynamic forms, and Flow in there, for example. And I also do mention around skills around like process builder and workflow rules in there. I also mentioned around the stuff I've done in the community to some degree as well. And I include that in my resume because they are, to me, I think they're quite important regarding skills and how you build. So if you've got a skill that you think is relevant to whatever role you want to go for, making sure those things match up with your CV and your resume is quite important, I would say, as well. And following on for that, again, this for me is possibly coming out some of my non-profit head from that and coming into like some of the business analyst kind of territory. But it's like, if I say I have a skill, can I evidence that effectively? And again, and with that is like, how do you do that? So again, I mentioned before around potentially having a portfolio, or even like doing content creation could potentially fit with that. But if I say, again, let's go with the example, like I would go for mine, like I put on my CV, hey, like I'm good with Flow. How can I ever demonstrate that, put that out in such a way where if someone was looking at what I do, that they can actually say, yes, Mark's good with Flow. Likewise, you might be saying, hey, look, I'm really, really good with DevOps. How can you evidence that and showcase that when you put that in your personal brand? And the final point or question asked around this point of expertise is, can I, again, quote unquote, sell my skills in a way that is seen as both important and relevant? With that, I'll probably pick up an example of a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago before I had COVID, where I was chatting with somebody who I know who had been looking at CVs not CVs, job specs. And they were looking at a job spec where they were asking for all these different kind of skills on there. And one thing they were asking for, this is for a junior admin role. And one thing they asked for in there was skills with Apex and Visualforce. Not something for a junior admin necessarily, in my opinion, but that conversation led into a talking point around, okay, what should be seen as important or relevant for those roles? And what you might find is particularly if like you have like for me, you're coming from the non-profit space, oftentimes what you'll see is these job specs get put out where they've essentially just been farmed off Google, and the people who've got the responsibility of writing those job specs don't really know what these things are. They don't know what Apex is. They don't know what Visualforce is. Half of them don't even know what Salesforce is a lot of the time, unfortunately. So having to think of how can you sell your skills in a way that's seen as both important and relevant and also accurate as well. Those are quite important bits within that. Now, that's really kind of all what I had for this presentation. So just before we wrap up and maybe head into discussion for a bit, did anybody have any questions or any talking points on this particular point of expertise before I stop sharing my screen?
Not particularly on that particular point, Mark, but I'm really interested to hear others' experience or views on personal branding as a whole. Now you've covered a good spectrum of lots of different points.
Cool. Great. Well, in that case, I am going to, and I've got some brief thoughts to consider just as we close again. So it would be wrong in personal brand to not actually mention social media or content creation. So I've got those two questions because like, do I need to be on social media? And what about content creation? The short answer to both is realistically, being on social media can be a benefit to our career prospects, but we don't have to be. As controversial as sounds, we don't have to be on Twitter. We don't have to be on LinkedIn. They do help, but we don't have to be if we really don't want to be. The main thing to think about with both of those tools is how can we use them to leverage and build up our personal brand. Other questions for suppose like where do I begin to build my brand? Who can I add as allies of that brand? So who can I network with? Who can say, hey, look, Luke's really solid. You can trust what he says and that kind of thing. What other avenues do I need to invest in? Maybe that might be things like certifications, super badges. That might be volunteer opportunities. It could be a whole bevy of things. And the last 2 points to consider is what message do I want to convey? So what do I want people to take away again from what I put out there in my personal brand? And what do I want to take away from it? And the last one, the most important question of all is, what is my reason for doing it? Why am I doing any of this? Because taking the time to put together your personal brand is a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that goes on for a long time. So to do it, you want to ask, why are we doing this? And with that being said, that does bring me to a close on the presentation aspect of it. And I'll stop sharing my screen before we move into discussion. And hopefully, none of that was too airy-fairy or too not detailed enough or anything like that. And shall we pause recording? I think what we might do is we might stop the recording here, and then we'll just leave it open for discussion, and then we'll do the announcements when we feel ready to wrap up the conversation.
Sure.
Cool. So we just stop the recording and we'll get on.